So here we'll take a few minutes to hear a talk by our expert, Dr. Matthew Savoca. Dr. Savoca is a National Geographic explorer and a researcher at the Hopkins Marine Station of Stanford University. He's done research in several different areas of marine sciences, from studying baleen whales to investigating the presence of chemical cues associated with marine plastic debris. So let's go ahead and give him a warm welcome.
All right. Well, thank you, Julia, for inviting me today to talk a little bit about what I do and hopefully hear some really cool ideas from all of you as well. I'm really excited to interact with this group. I really like communicating the science that we do with people that are, enthusiastic about, trying to solve some of the world's problems with the cool technology and science we're able to do. So right now I'm a researcher at the Hopkins Marine Station, which is Stanford's marine lab. It's in Pacific Grove, California. It's the thing right behind me. It's a place where I used to work pre-pandemic. And maybe one day I'll be able to go back there. So if anything in particular strikes a chord with you and you want to discuss anything that I talk about, or in particular about the Marine Station or doing marine research, please let me know. Reach out to me. Feel free. I have my contact email there, and we'll also have it at the end. So I'm happy to interact with you more outside of this event as well. So who am I? A little bit of short background. I am originally from New York City, and I've kind of always been interested in nature and outdoors. And initially that was inspired by a love of birds. And I was always a weirdo, and that's okay. Being weird is cool. I'm here to tell you. And being a nerd, which I definitely am, is also cool. As you can see, as early, I think I was like 4 in that picture, dressing up like a bird. And my parents thought I was silly, which is accurate. But then I went to college and actually decided, no, I want to do this sort of thing, environmental science, conservation biology, as a career. And so starting in college, which is what that second picture is from, I started doing research on seabirds. And since then, I've done more research I'll talk about coming up right after this. But I've also tried to transition to do more policy and outreach work. In other words, I'm interested not only in the research itself, but how that research can actually have an impact on the real world. And obviously doing policy related work is one way to achieve that, hopefully, but another potential way is to talk with people like yourselves, who are the next generation of young and excited scientists who are going to really tackle huge problems on the planet, that I'm really excited to work with people like all of you. So where are we? Plastic is exploding in terms of its predominance in our society, and the sort of explosion of plastics in our society is relatively recent. That's what this figure here is trying to show. So plastics mostly were invented about 100 years ago by various chemical companies like DuPont, but they didn't really come into mainstream use until after World War II. So we really have only been dealing with plastics on Earth in any real way for about 75 years or so. And you'll notice there, I have an orange star around late 1960s, early 1970s, and there's a reason for that. And that's the reason for that is because actually that's about when we first saw plastics in the marine environment. And of course, that's what I study, and that's what we'll talk about. Interestingly, scientists first noticed plastic in the environment, not actually in the water, not actually floating in the ocean, but scientists first reported on this problem by people were surveying albatross colonies in the Hawaiian Islands. And they had noticed that albatross were bringing back plastic trash to their nests and feeding it to their chicks. The picture here is a picture from that original paper from research done in the 1960s. And what it shows is a baby albatross, a chick, that had been fed so much plastic that it died, which of course is quite sad. Luckily, that sort of situation is actually fairly rare. And we can talk, if anyone wants to, about the particulars of this. But in any case, it was actually first noticed as a problem in the marine environment by animals bringing plastic back to land. And a few years later, in the 1970s, was actually when plastic was first described floating out in the ocean. And that's really recent, is I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is all this stuff has happened in the last 50 years. And our interest in terms of scientific interest, policy interest in plastics and plastic pollution is very recent, really only within the last 20 years. So this is a problem that has emerged in most of our lifetimes and will presumably get worse before it gets better, as is the case with a lot of these environmental issues we're dealing with today. From an ecological standpoint, and that's what my background is primarily in, is in ecology. This is when animals eat plastic in the ocean. We now know that hundreds and possibly thousands of different species eat plastic, and this is known as an evolutionary trap. And what that means is that there is something about the way plastic looks or smells, or there's something about the plastic that is tricking these animals into thinking the plastic is food. And that's something that interested me as an ecologist when I was in grad school, starting about 10 years ago or so. And just to let you know that we're not, our animals, human beings are not separate from the natural world. Evolutionary traps have also been described in people. And the famous one that I like to share is fast food. A lot of us, I like fast food. And why is that? And the reason is because our bodies have evolved over millions of years to desire things that have fats and salts and sugars, because in our evolutionary past, those were things that were really important and very hard to come by. Whereas now, various food chains like McDonald's exploit that evolutionary history to their benefit and our detriment. So this idea of an evolutionary trap is there's something evolutionarily deep within these organisms that is tricking them into thinking plastic is food, or in our case, into thinking that McDonald's is a good meal that we should be eating all the time. But again, we're focusing on animals and plastic. So in particular, what I studied was actually animals' sense of smell and how animals use their sense of smell to make decisions about the world. And one interesting compound that I have been studying for a while now is a sulfur-based compound known as dimethyl sulfide. It is a very simple molecule made up of a sulfur and 2 methyl groups, and it stinks, which is helpful for these birds because certain species of marine birds use this compound to find productive areas to feed. The reason for that, or how that happens in a simple framework, is you have a lot of phytoplankton, so that's like marine floating plants. That's the basis of the marine food web in most pelagic systems. And you have krill or various other organisms that eat that marine phytoplankton. And when they eat that phytoplankton, the phytoplankton themselves off-gas this DMS. And so this basically, certain species of animals can use this odor and different concentrations of this odor to alert them as to where to eat. Imagine being blindfolded in the mall and you want to find the food court. You might use your nose and you might use various scents of food or coffee or Cinnabons or whatever you want to find that food. It's like that, but in the ocean. And of course, the birds come in not to eat the plants, but to eat the animals that are eating the plants, which is kind of an interesting ecological relationship there. And when I looked at a lot of data, and this is data that I hadn't collected, but was generally available to me, what I noticed is that those species of birds that use this chemical compound, DMS, to find food, eat plastic far more frequently than those species that do not use plastic, that do not use DMS to find food. So then our question was, okay, well, is there any association with marine plastic with this chemical compound DMS? And if so, how? How does that happen? So what we wanted to do is put plastic out at sea and actually test the way it smelled, which sounds like a crazy idea, but sometimes crazy ideas end up working out. So what I did was I took plastics, I sewed them into bags where the water could pass in and out, and we put them out at sea in a couple different locations, including currently where I work right now, which is the southernmost location in South Monterey Bay there. And after about a month at sea, we retrieved those bags and they looked like that. And this is a pretty well-known phenomenon. It's known as biofouling. And what that just means is that these plastics were covered in biological life, bacteria, algae, and marine invertebrates. And of course, we knew that they were covered in this biological life, but we wanted to know what did that actually smell like, which again is a totally strange question, I recognize. But to do that, we worked in a lab at UC Davis, where I was going to school, that actually used this chemical equipment to experimentally determine how wine smelled, because apparently wine smell is important to people and its price and how it tastes and how desirable it is. But in any case, we used these fancy machines called gas chromatographs and they've recently updated this gas chromatograph, so it's not as old and strange looking as this one, but in any case, we use this chemical instrumentation to actually figure out that yes, every single sample that we put out at sea had this sulfur compound associated with it. So in other words, that provided potential evidence to suggest that there is the way that plastic smells that might be interesting to marine animals. So the last thing that I did was I actually wanted to test this hypothesis on a marine animal that we know eats plastic in the wild. And seabirds are really, really hard to work with. So we chose a fish. And in particular, we chose a northern anchovy, which are very important species in our coastal waters here in California. And we performed a fairly simple experiment at the aquarium in San Francisco, where we pumped in different odors of different types to different schools of anchovies and filmed their behavioral response. And the main thing to focus on in this slide is just the top two panels, where you see when we pumped in that odor, that's that colored dye substance in the top of each one of those panels. And what you'll notice is that the fish respond in a similar way, aggregating and balling around that odor. And that's the way these fish sort of investigate what's going on. And you can compare the relative behavioral response with the fish as they respond to plastic odor and food odor. It's quite similar, as you'll see. And the difference in the control odor, which is no odor at all, just odorless dyed water going in. And so this was some behavioral evidence that suggested that the way plastic smells after it had been out at sea, because of the algae and bacteria and things that grow on it, might actually produce a chemical signature that could in fact trick animals into thinking plastic is food. Now I study whales. Similar problems though, similar issues. I study pollution in whales. This is a video from Monterey Bay of a blue whale. And actually I'm on that boat, which is cool. That blue whale is like 85 feet long because the boat is about 65 feet. That's how we figured that out. This is a blue whale taking a big gulp of krill. And the point of this is, and don't mind the cheesy music here, but in any case, the point of this is these whales filter humongous amounts of water and eat tremendous amounts of prey. And what we want to do now is figure out if and how much plastic these whales are eating, and then secondarily, if and how that is affecting them. So that's primarily what I'm working on now. So the initial stuff with the birds and the fish was what I did in graduate school, and now the stuff with the whales and the plastic is what I'm doing at Hopkins Marine Station currently. The last thing I'll leave you with is there are various mechanisms to deal with this problem. And of course, you guys will come up with various possibilities today as to how to deal with that. And I'm excited to hear what you come up with. But California is a great place to be working on this problem because it's a very progressive state. And just here are some recent examples of various legislation and legislative mechanisms that have been used to address this problem. And when you live in a place like California, you actually have a state government that, generally speaking, will support environmental initiatives towards sustainability. So in other words, the transition from going from your science to actual policy that could make a change in the real world is a thing that can actually happen in the state of California. And that's one of the reasons why I'm excited to be here and talking with all of you smart people. So in any case, I've worked with a lot of people. All this science is very collaborative. So thanks to all these people. And again, if there's any way in which I can help you connect your networks out further in marine science or science in general, please let me know. That's all my contact information, and feel free to reach out, of course, not just today, but after the event as well. And thanks again to Julia in particular, and Stephen as well for inviting me. This has been a lot of fun so far.